Okay, welcome everyone. We're super excited that you all are here for today's deep dive where we will be going over the homeownership pro forma with the very expert and all-knowing Corey Leon from the National Development Council. I will introduce myself. I am Angel Starks and I get to serve as the Developer Academy Manager here at Spark. As I said before, this is actually my first Zoom deep dive. So I'm really interested in seeing how to navigate your questions. So I will be watching the chat. And if you have any other questions or whatnot, we usually have these in a pretty informal manner in that if you have a question, just raise your hand via the Zoom feature, or if I see that you have a question from the chat, I'll make sure to ask on your behalf or to ask for clarification so that you can partake in this knowledge as much as you can. But just know that this is informal and we want you to ask questions and want you to navigate so that you can get as much as you want from this conversation. Also, understanding that some of you might not be past graduates of the Developer Academy. And so there's some varying levels of knowledge or involvement, and we want to consider all of those things. So we just want to make sure that you are, you feel comfortable, and I am here to help navigate what that looks like. Just a little bit about Spark. Ooh, I haven't seen this PowerPoint in play, so that's pretty cool. Spark is a nonprofit organization with the mission to help profoundly transform disinvested neighborhoods into thriving and prosperous communities. And one of our ways of doing that is through capacity building of the Developer Academy. And just a little bit about the Developer Academy is that we have opened applications for that. It is a 2 to 3 week basically platform where we go really in depth about all sorts of things. And since we are limited on the amount of individuals that can participate, we provide monthly deep dives. And today's deep dive is about homeownership. And we also will have one next month over property management. And then our Developer Academy, which we are accepting applications now through August 12th. You can go to our website to obtain that information, and then we will continue on. Now, our deep dives are featured on our website, so if you have any questions about that or would like to enroll, then you are able to go to our website to register. For our fall cohort, we actually are trying a new structure where we will be focusing on 2 separate content tracks instead of combining them all together. We will have first the for sale single family housing development, which this deep dive aligns with heavily, and then also the focus on the rental, multifamily, and commercial development. So we will be incorporating an online and in-person sessions, and then the opportunity to have capstone competition. If you would like more information about that, you can reach out to me. Also, it's on our website, and we want to encourage individuals to participate and to learn more. So spread the word. Want to thank our partners, and of course, Corey here. We wouldn't be able to do this literally without you, so we appreciate you and the organization, and also Freddie Mac. And our sponsors are Wells Fargo, Kiewit, US Bank, and Bank of the West. So for today, I will go ahead and switch this over to make Corey the host, but there is the opportunity for you to look through the casebook. We will be going over the Dogwood Street and the Pewtown housing, and then we have our Excel sheet. But Corey will lay some foundation first, and then we will go from there. I see a couple of things in the chat, and so I will navigate through that. But Corey, I am turning it over to you.
All right, great, Angel.
Okay, and you should be set.
All right, so welcome everyone. I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes just about the fundamentals of home ownership. And then that'll leave us an hour and a half to go through cases. So what we'll do is we'll do the first case together, and then we'll do this, and then we'll go over that case a little bit. We'll have some discussion time. We'll then do the next case where you'll have an opportunity to do it on your own. And then we'll go over that case. And depending on time, there's also a third case in the case book. So if we don't get a chance to get through the third case, then I'll send an answer key to Spark so that you can do it on your own and check your answers against that in the future. Let's just make sure, since not everyone has gone through the Developer Academy, that we have kind of a fundamental baseline knowledge about homeownership. So I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. So hopefully everyone can see the lecture notes.
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So the nice thing about homeownership is that I think overall it's less complicated than rental. We're not talking long-term ownership. And so there's not a long-term hold with homeownership. The key to both rental and homeownership is really understanding the market. And as we go through it in the development academies, always understanding who your customer is, right? Who is your target market? Who are you trying to serve? Who's going to live in these homes? And so if you always keep your end user in mind, whether it be a renter, or a buyer, it helps you be successful. So some of the things that is needed for success in the for sale housing, number one, identifying that target buyer, but you also need accurate estimates of costs. Right now, that can be a little bit of challenge. That can be a little challenging because of supply chain issues and so forth. A lot of folks are having trouble identifying where their materials are going to be coming from, and that can cause some issues. One of the ways that I've dealt with that recently is increasing my contingency. So normally for new construction, you might go with a 5% contingency, and I've been regularly going with a 10% contingency, just in case, right? If I never use the contingency, that's fine. It goes, I don't spend it, and so it helps overall with the profit of the project, but I have it there if I need it. We're also relying on market value for sales price. We have to keep in mind that sales price is a function of value, not cost. And that's my hometown of Detroit is a perfect example of that, where it may cost in today's market $400,000 to build a home, but in many neighborhoods, the prevailing value of homes are only $200,000, which means that there's going to be a cost value differential. And let me silence my phone. It's annoying me. So in certain neighborhoods, we've got to deal with the cost value differential, that the cost of the home may be much greater than the underlying value. We also have to understand the demand for housing to be produced. So, and that includes both, the type of housing, the absorption of that housing, how quickly things are selling, and also the affordability of housing. One thing that has been true over the last few decades is that our demand for space has continued to grow. So, the average household size, not in terms of people, but in terms of square footage, has continued to grow decade over decade. And that's despite actually household size in terms of people going down over time. So, now our average household size, I believe, is now under 2 people, but in terms of square footage, we're now at or above 2,000 square feet per person in many markets. So and that can go towards absorption in terms of, we want houses that the market wants, right? We want something that's marketable. But it is counterintuitive in terms of affordability. The more square footage you build, the more expensive the house is. So we have to balance these things, right? The demand, overall demand for larger housing, but the fact that construction is expensive and it will cause our costs to rise. And then, especially if we're doing production housing, effective management to control the production of the houses and the financing costs is really, really important. Now, if you're only building one house, it's fairly simple in terms of control. In fact, the economics are fairly simple. Let's say that we have a lot that we're going to buy for $20,000. We're going to build a house for $160,000. We're going to have some soft costs, architecture, engineering, permits, the interest that we have to pay for our construction loan. All of those things may be another $90,000. As you can see, we're quickly, well over $200,000, and we haven't talked about profit yet. So when we say add a 10% profit margin on the cost, we can easily be well over 200,000, approaching $300,000. So, so we have to understand, what is it going to cost us to produce each unit? Now, there are some savings in kind of mass building, but there's also a lot more complication in that. And understanding absorption is very, very important if you're going to be doing more than just a few units. And then understand that difference between the cost and the value. It may cost us $300,000 to produce the unit, but is the value in that particular neighborhood $400,000? Great, we've got a nice healthy profit there. Or is the value in that neighborhood $200,000, and we've got to figure out a way of making up the difference. And then, who can afford the product? So can buyers find financing based on 30% of their income? And what does that look like for the community that you're trying to serve, or for not only the community, but the population that you're trying to serve? And so understanding the median income of that population, if we follow the federal guideline, which is 30% of income going towards housing, then what does that mean in terms of their buying power? So a couple of the cases we'll look at buying power of individuals. So one of the things that we talk about in homeownership is project viability. So project viability is that the costs are lower than the value. If the costs are not lower than the value, then we've got to figure out gap financing to bridge that difference. So with homeownership, there's 2 distinct financing transactions. There's the financing of the development itself, and that's going to happen with a construction loan. That's a short-term loan. It's paid off by the sale of the asset itself. And, typically construction loans are for not more than 24 months. Now, during that 24 months, your interaction with the construction lender is going to be fairly intense. They're going to want to understand the progress that you're making along the entire, from start to getting your certificate of occupancy. And so understanding their procedures, understanding what they're looking for, understanding the draw process is all very important. The other one, unlike with rental housing where you would have permanent financing that would take you from placing a building in service far into the future until you sell the property. In this case, we are selling the property immediately after, hopefully immediately after finishing it. And so that financing is financing the purchase, and it's actually the buyer that's responsible for that financing. But every successful developer that I've ever worked with in terms of the single family or the home ownership market has always understood that buyers have to have financing, and a smart developer will help make those connections between buyers and mortgage lenders. So whether it's sometimes hosting a mortgage lender at the property, having referral sources for mortgage lenders, understanding the programs yourself so that you can make good referrals to programs like FHA, or through your state housing finance authority, NYFA, may also have mortgage programs for buyers. So I just went over those. Although I should just pause for a second and just, remind everyone that banks are naturally risk averse. Banks have a deep level of downside risk, and they have very limited upside potential. What's the upside potential for a bank? That you pay your loan and they get the interest on the loan. So right now, that interest might be, 5.25% on a single family mortgage. If the buyer gets a new job and can suddenly, afford a bigger mortgage, it's not like the bank can change the terms or anything. The bank is stuck at that, whatever that interest rate was. If it's 5.25%, they're going to be stuck more than likely. It's a 30-year fixed term mortgage. They're going to be stuck for 30 years at that 5.25%. So banks don't have a lot of upside. But what's their downside risk? Their downside risk is the buyer goes into default and they have to sell the property through a foreclosure. And normally they should be able to get their money back out of the property if they've done their due diligence right. There's not too big of a difference between the value and the loan amount. But as we saw in the Great Recession, where homes were selling for 10 cents on the dollar, that what they were selling for 5 years prior, banks, therefore, they were getting 10 cents on the dollar or less on their mortgages. And so we have to keep in mind that banks have huge amount of downside risk and very, very limited upside potential. And that makes them naturally conservative. So the construction loan typically has a specific term, like I said, not more than 24 months. most construction lenders have that short-term perspective. They get repaid when your project is completed. Really, they get paid when you get to sell the property and the buyer's permanent mortgage takes out their construction loan. You don't actually have to pay a construction loan during the construction period. Typically, the interest accrues during the loan period. In fact, oftentimes it's just set up so that it is assumed a certain amount of interest will be charged during the construction period. And then the principal and the interest is repaid when you actually sell the property. So how much construction loan are you going to take out? Well, you're going to draw down a construction loan. So let's say that you're approved for $200,000. The bank doesn't give you all $200,000 up front. You have to do the work, show the progress of the construction, and then request a draw to draw down the money over time. So eventually you will get that $200,000 loan, but only after you've actually shown the work and completed the construction. Then the interest is just tacked on as you go forward. So the nice thing is that you only pay interest on what you've actually drawn down. And so that does mean that, say that you take out your loan for a year. If you draw down the money in roughly equal installments over that year, if your interest rate is 5%, then your effective interest rate is more like 2.5%, that you're actually only going to be paying interest on about half of the balance of your loan over that time period. So there's definitely an advantage in that. And we can talk about a formula that helps you estimate construction interest.
Does anyone have any questions in regards to that? Nope. Okay.
So, and as we go into the spreadsheet, the cash flow tab, the purpose of the cash flow tab is really to help you identify how much construction interest you'll be paying, and then how big of a construction loan you need to borrow. The spreadsheet is really set up for production building, right? I'm going to be building a subdivision with eventually 50 homes in it. If you're only doing 1 or 2 homes, there's a shortcut that we can talk about. So I think that's all that I wanted to talk about in terms of let me just talk about the steps in the development process. So the overarching steps in the development process is understanding who your buyer is. So just keep that in mind from the very first step. So whether it's site identification or market analysis or the design, always keep that buyer in mind. Who's going to be the buyer for your product? So site identification. If my target buyer is a family, then what types of site characteristics might I want? Maybe near a park, near a school, near a daycare center. So understanding again who your market is will help guide you in terms of the site identification. In terms of market analysis, if I'm serving families, then how many families are in my community? Is my community growing in terms of number of families, or is it shrinking? How much on average do they make? Right, so am I talking about a group that is typically higher income or lower income? Well, kids are expensive, so probably their buying power is reflective of that. In terms of my design, am I going to go with, say, a one-bedroom townhouse? Not for families, right? So I want to design and structure a house that's related to my target market. The financing in terms of the construction loan and the permanent financing, we've already discussed. But then once I obtain my financing, I've got to start with my land development, then my unit construction, and then my sales. Now, more than likely, well, we've listed these kind of in a linear order. In reality, these things all happen in parallel, right? I've identified my market, and so I'm doing my market analysis while I'm looking for sites. I'm probably going to identify 3 or 4 sites that I'm interested in, and while I'm completing my market analysis, I'll be assessing each site for their strengths and weaknesses. I'll be talking with my construction lender as soon as I kind of have a development concept in mind, let them know what I'm thinking, and try to get their feedback in terms of what the bank's overall appetite for financing is. I'm also going to be looking at things like my third-party evaluations, my engineer. I might need soil testing and so forth. So some of that may be going on in terms of site identification while I'm still working on financing, because I may find that of my three sites that I've identified, one of them has really bad soils, and so the cost of taking care of that kind of eliminates that site. So in reality, these are all the things that you have to think about, but you're really going to be thinking about them in parallel. All these activities are going to be happening at the same time. And there's more in here, and I've sent the a PDF of these lecture notes to Spark so that they can distribute them.
Thanks. I have put in a Google link in the chat, and that has all 3 of the documents that we're needing today. That includes the lecture notes, the Excel sheet, and the casebook, FYI.
The next key part that we should talk about is the appraisal process and understanding appraisals. My, quick 30-second opinion on appraisals is read them. Don't just go to the page 2, of the appraisal and look at that little number that's in the box. And once you are either overjoyed or underwhelmed, closing it and putting it on the shelf. That appraisal has a lot of really good information in it from a third party who by their profession is an observer of the market. And so, always read the appraisal. It is a fundamentally key part of your market analysis. if you're not at the stage of needing an appraisal, you may want to have a market study, which is similar and will help give you insight in terms of the size of the market, what they can afford to pay for housing, etc. But in both cases, be sure to read the whole thing. It's amazing to me how many times folks, just go in looking for the stuff that they're looking for and then stop there. So, and I have to update this slide. So one of the things that we're looking for in appraisal is to figure out the fair market value of the property. And the definition of fair market value has actually changed, and I need to update this slide. It's actually the most probable price in an open and competitive market. And so it's not a guarantee, right? What's the value of the property? The value of the property is whatever someone's willing to put their cold, hard cash on the table to pay for the property. But it is an educated guess as to what the value of the property is, of what someone would actually pay for the property. And so we want there to be cash or commonly accessible financing involved in any transactions that are looked at in appraisal. You don't want there to be special financing involved. We also want there to be a willing buyer and a willing seller. So typically, we don't want the appraiser to have used any sort of foreclosed property in their analysis, because those have really, frankly, different market dynamics than an open market sale. We need there to be sufficient time for the information to permeate the market. Now, that's pretty common. That's pretty easy for residential, because typically, well, in most states, there's some public means of reporting sale prices, but just also the informal network of information permeating the market. If you've ever owned a house, in a neighborhood, typically when there's a sale, all the neighbors know pretty darn quickly, because people are very interested in that, right? Houses are, for most people, their largest investment that they'll ever make. And therefore, there's always that interest in what things are selling for. And we want it to be a fair and competitive market. So I think that's been about 30 minutes, which is, I think, all the time we really have. But there's lots of good information in these lecture notes. And again, with this upcoming Development Academy, we'll be going, more deeply into this subject for the first part of the session. And so this year we're separating homeownership from rental. Any questions on just kind of the fundamentals? All right. Well, then let's do the fun part, which is the case studies. So I've prepared several cases for you. And hopefully you can see this on the screen. So the case book looks like this. And so there's 4 cases. I think we'll easily be able to get through 2 cases. We may be able to get through a third as well. And the case I thought that we would do in this session would be Dogwood Street and Pewtown. And then if we had time, we can look at Crescent City and Broke. There's also at the end of the case book some helpful information and statements and things like that, different forms. So let's do the first case together, which is the Dogwood Street case. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split my screen. Now, hopefully this this works okay. And you're able to see both at the same time. If not, then I'll just rely on all of you kind of following along at home. So let's take a few minutes and just read over the case.
Judging by the silence in the chat and on here, I'm assuming everybody's reading. But there was a question here. And I'm not quite sure if this is in regards to the case study verbiage, or it says there was a larger square footage home is less to build than the smaller home. But that might be in the actual cost sheet. Did you want to clarify your question a bit? Oh, yes, I see. So it says 4 homes will be 1,400 square feet at the cost of 142 per square feet, and the remaining 4 homes will be 1,200 square feet at the cost of 146 per square foot. I believe that's the clarifying question.
Yeah, so keep in mind that the most expensive items in homes are typically kitchens and bathrooms. And so you still have one kitchen and one bathroom in each house. So a smaller unit may sometimes be a little bit more expensive on a per square foot basis, because if you're putting in similar kitchens and baths, you know, adding an extra bedroom is relatively cheap compared to the cost of, say, adding another bathroom, which can be rather expensive.
So because you're not getting as much square footage, it costs more, even though all of the same components are there. That makes sense.
Yeah, the overall cost of the house will be less, you know, but not substantial, not a little less than you would expect, just because you're still including a kitchen and a bathroom in each unit. And I'm not sure if this one says how many bathrooms, you know, there are, but, you know, a proportional number of bathrooms. So let's go ahead and start populating our spreadsheet. So hopefully everyone can see the spreadsheet off to the the right. First thing always to do is to save your spreadsheet as a different version.
And that's more or less so that we can reuse it in the future.
That's right. Yep. So you're not messing up your template. Always start with a fresh template. In fact, it's not a bad idea if you want to, contact someone at NDC to ask them for the latest template. And so a couple things about the spreadsheet. First of all, if you try to change, so the spreadsheet is set up so that the unshaded portions are where you can make a change. So I can put in, for example, Dogwood Street here. But if I try to put it in next in E4, I get this error message. The seller chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. To make a change, unprotect the sheet, and you might be requested to enter a password. So you will be asked to enter a password. The super secret password, and this is for, only participants of this deep dive, is NDC, either all in caps or all in lowercase letters. But that's the super secret password. So if you do need to make a change, you can. But what I suggest is that you try to keep the spreadsheet locked in its template format. There's a lot of formulas here, and this is not even the most complicated sheet of the 3 sheets. And so it's amazing sometimes how, small changes that you make, can really have a long-term and pretty wide impact. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to put in our development budget. And we've got, we don't have a building that we're acquiring, so we just have land. We have $130,000 of land that we're acquiring. We've got permits. Permits is here under row 14. So I'm in D14. Permits are $20,000. I've got some clearance and demolition, not uncommon for urban sites. Right? It was permissible in most cities to simply knock the building into the basement and then cover it up with dirt. Depending on your city, up until the 80s. So you'll often find situations where, illegal demolitions or improper demolitions are probably still happening today. So always assume until you've actually had it, checked out, if you're working in an urban area, that there is something beneath that surface, that there's an old foundation, there's poor soils, there's demolition debris, something down there. We have to do some repairs to the streets and sidewalks. That's going to be $39,000. And we've got some utility connections that we have to make. So there's not a specific, oh, wait a minute, here it is. Utility connections for $80,000. Now you'll notice that unit construction is actually, it's shaded. And when we click on it, it's referring us to G54. So that's down at the bottom of this sheet. There's a whole section here on the construction and selling of the units. So we have a 1,400 square foot model. The cost for that 1,400 square foot model is $142 per square foot. We'll be building 4 of them. And we'll be selling those 1,400 square foot units for $300,000. On the 1,200 square foot unit homes, we'll be building those for $146 per square foot. We're building 4 of those, and we plan on selling those for $260,000. So our total construction cost is being pulled from G54. So it's how much we're our total cost for these larger units plus the total cost for the smaller units. So our total hard construction costs are almost 1.5 million. So now that we've put that in, it populates automatically here in our unit construction. And so we also, there's one fee here that is kind of hidden, and that's in the last paragraph on page 2 of your casebook, the construction financing. So Sparkle is going to offer the construction financing at an interest rate of 6%. The construction loan origination fee will be $4,000 and paid in month 2. So we do have a financing cost. Oops. We have a construction loan origination fee of $4,000. And I believe that that is, well, let's talk a little bit about this first sentence on page 3. The developer expects to receive a 10% developer fee. So there's actually 2 places to put developer fees on this spreadsheet. And there's a little comment indicator here, the little red tag in the development fee. So if you're given a dollar figure, you're going to put it on your development budget. If you're given a percentage, then you're going to use the profit line on the profit and loss tab. The profit and loss tab is the blue tab. And the blue tab largely calculates on its own. So you'll notice that it's pulled the information on constructing the units. The selling costs we still have to update on another tab. But here in C39 is where we can put that 10% developer fee. And the typical development fee for homeownership projects is somewhere between 10 and 15%. And that's of the greater of either the cost of the project or the revenue of the project. Now, why would we have it be the greater of the cost or the revenue? Well, particularly when you're trying to serve a low income population, your costs may actually exceed the sale price. And you may be using something like down payment assistance to fill that gap. And so from a developer standpoint, we don't want a developer to be disinterested in doing for sale housing for lower income people. And so if we strictly had it as 10% of revenue, there'd be a disadvantage for doing low income units. If we did it 10% of only costs, there'd be a disadvantage for doing higher income units. So this way it's a maximum of the two is the way that the formula reads, right? It's a maximum of the two. All right, so we've not entered quite all the data yet though. You'll notice that there's this information about when these costs occur. And that's where the most complicated tab of this entire workbook comes in, and that's the cash flow tab. So you'll notice on the profit and loss tab, there's only one item where you can even change without unlocking the spreadsheet. With the development budget, you know, there's maybe 50 items that you can change without unlocking the spreadsheet. The cash flow tab, on the other hand, is a wee bit more complicated. So let me make this a little larger so it's more readable, but this way you get a full view of what it looks like. It's a pretty complicated document. The main purpose of the cash flow tab is twofold. One, it is to calculate the amount of construction interest. Two, it looks at what is the amount of debt you need and what is the amount of equity you need to raise in order to have this project be viable. So there's a couple things that we have to do. AHAMO, Extraordinary Real Estate, is going to be selling these units with a sales commission of 5%. So we need to change the sales expense in D7 to 5%. And let me make this a little larger so you can see it. Okay. Sparkle is going to be charging 6%. So D8 is 6%. The developer estimates a construction schedule of 90 days per home, so 3 months to build, and a sale in the following month, so 1 month to sell it. And that sales or the market study has said that we should be able to absorb 1 home per month. So what that means is, as we do our housing starts, we don't want to be starting more than 1 unit at a time. So we're going to be doing this, well, we have 8 homes. It's taking 4. We're going to be doing this project basically over a 24-month period. Because as we want to make it so that we only have 1 home on the market. It won't be 24 months. We only have 1 home on the market at any one time. So getting back to this section here with the land and when it happens, the whole purpose of the cash flow tab is to look at your project monthly. And so what we're doing is we're telling the spreadsheet when events are occurring. So in this case, we've got, we're going to be buying the land. And this, I think, makes sense. We're going to be buying the land in the first month. That's when that expenditure is going to happen. And you'll notice that there's a cumulative expenditure that basically is a sum of the row to the right. And that helps you make the comparison and make sure that you have spent all the money in your budget. We've got $20,000 in permits that will be at the start of home construction. Well, we're told here in the timing of expenses that construction of the houses will begin in month 6, and 1 home will be built each month. So construction will begin in year 6. We're going to start with 1 home. And then once we get started on that 1 home, we can start on the next home, right? And we do that until we've built all 8 of our homes. Okay, so you may have noticed here in D15 that if I don't have the number of homes that I say that I'm building on my development budget, that I get this error. The number must equal my budget. So I had to keep on going until I got to my 8 housing starts. So now let's go back to this information. So the $20,000 happens at the start of home construction. So we're going to build our first home, and we have to pull the permits at that time. There's a little comment box here. If you forget something like where are our permits? Permits are under other construction, and my little comment box here tells me the categories that this grouping includes. So permits are an other construction item. So I'm going to put $20,000 in month 6. I have some clearance and demolition work that I have to do. Clearance and demolition is also an other construction item. So in this same row, and this tells me that it's evenly spread between months 2 and 3. So that's $105,000 in months 2 and 3.
Corey, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Now, the cells that are in this cash flow tab, they are pulled numbers from the other tabs, or if we needed to unlock this with those same password, the super secret NDC work to unlock this, or would you advise
Yes.
us unlocking? Can you show us how to do that if we need to?
Sure. I would suggest never unlocking the cash flow tab unless you absolutely have to, because it is such a complicated one. But let's say that you wanted to make a modification here. You go to review, unprotect sheet, and then let's see, is it, I'll try capitalized first. Okay, capitalized, yep. So capitalized is for the development budget. I think I may have done all of these as
But
capitalized.
again, there's so many formulas that interconnect over all of these tabs.
Yes.
If one thing goes wrong, it could shift a lot of different values within the Excel spreadsheet. So
Absolutely.
the recommendation is to keep it locked in order for you to fully get all of the calculations to work cohesively. Okay.
Yep. And if you do decide to change something for some reason, always, like, let's say that I wanted to do something different with this percentage, always highlight it, right? Give it a visual indicator that I've made a change there that may be hidden by a formula, right? I may not realize that there was if I pull this thing up 3 months from now, I may not remember that I made a change in this cell. So, highlighting it helps just, put that little tickler,
That's a great tip. Yep. And of course, like you said before, once we start a new project, you always save as, in order to make sure that you have the template as an original in its full form, so that you can have something to refer back to. So that's great advice.
Yeah, so many times have I seen people, contact me in a panic because, their numbers just are not working out at all. And, it was because they grabbed their previous project. They had made a formula change someplace, a formula change that doesn't make any sense for their new project, and therefore it's causing some wacky number, So getting back to the cash flow tab, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this cumulative expenditure to equal the other construction number. So we have streets and sidewalks that we have to do repairs to. And those 39,000 evenly spread over months 4 and 5. And streets and sidewalks are an infrastructure issue. So I want to be in the infrastructure row, columns 4 and 5, months 4 and 5. And then this one, since I can't easily divide $39,000 by 2, I'm going to do a formula. So equal $39,000 by 2. And then I'm going to pull that across. So now the infrastructure is done. Unit construction is done. Property acquisition is done. I still have some other construction I need to do. I also have to do utility connections. And utility connections are also in months 4 and 5. So utility connections are an other construction item. So I want to make sure that I'm in that row. Rows 4 and 5. So $40,000 in month 4, $40,000 in month 5. So now all of these are equal. I don't have any professional fees in this case. Who knows, maybe Barking Mad is using a previously approved home plan, so they don't have to pay an architect. Other professional fees include things like environmental, market studies, geotechnical work, all of those types of things. We do have some financing costs though, $4,000, and the loan origination fee will be paid in month 2, the case says. So we have $4,000 in month 2. So now our budget matches our cumulative expenditures. So we know that we have captured all of our expenses by month. A couple things to note. One is that you actually don't put any numbers in the unit construction row. That's because you have to put in the housing starts, and then based on the housing starts, it will automatically take our home price. So it's costing us, on average, it's costing us $187,000 to build a home. So it's taking that $187,000 average, it's dividing it by 3, and it's putting a third of that here. Now in the next month, not only am I still building this house, but I've started a second house. So it's taking this number for house number 1, the second month of house number 1, plus the first month of house number 2. Then in month 3, I've got the 3rd month of house number 1. I've got the 2nd month of house number 2, and I've got the 1st month of house number 3. So I've got 3 thirds of a house happening at the same time. And then this is going to continue for a while. But then eventually it's going to start tapering off, right? So now I'm not starting any more houses. So I'm wrapping up house number 12. And here I've wrapped up house number 12 from month 12. And I've got the last month of the house that I started in month 13. And then eventually that cost goes away. I've completely built all of my houses. So there's that row that I really don't have to worry about. The other one is the construction interest row. You'll notice that that's shaded out. And this is going to be dependent on how much of these costs above do I pay for with debt? Because we've got a couple of different sources here. We've got some debt, we may have some equity, and then we're going to have some city funds. So, in fact, let's go ahead and take a look at this construction financing section. The CDFI will finance 50% of the land acquisition. So my percentage debt here in column I, I've got 50% of my acquisition being covered by debt. 50% of infrastructure, permits, demolition, and utility connections. Well, those items are all, most of those items are in other construction, and then my streets and sidewalks are in infrastructure. So they're going to pay 50% of other construction and 50% of infrastructure. They will pay 80% of home construction. So my unit construction is 80%, and 80% of the finance costs. So my construction interest and my construction finance cost can all be covered by the bank. And now you'll see that construction interest had been 0. This row 23 had been 0 and 0. It's now populated with construction interest because it's taking, for example, here, it's taking 50% of this 105, and that's applying the monthly interest rate. So if my construction interest is 6%, my monthly interest rate is 0.5%, which is how I get the $325. So by far, this is the most complicated tab. If you're doing a single home or just a couple of homes, then I would suggest possibly even not doing the cash flow tab and overriding your construction loan interest here and using a formula. And so you can estimate construction loan interest pretty well by using the following formula. You take 50% times the construction loan size. You multiply that by your annual interest rate times the number of months of construction, and then you have to divide that by 12. And this method, oh, of course, it doesn't show. Let's see.
Do you want to copy and paste that into the chat?
Sure.
I put it in the chat, but there are lots of different definitions in this sheet. And it's helpful if you need any type of clarification. I know sometimes when I'm looking at it, I overthink like, okay, is this my debt versus the debt that I am inquiring or acquiring from the loan and all of those types of things. But then I readjust myself. So if you are having these questions, please make sure you speak up because somebody else is probably having the same question.
That's right. So it's the total amount of the construction, oh, and an extra S in there. The construction loan.
Says, what are we dividing by 12?
We're dividing the number of months of construction by 12. And the reason here is that I'm taking my annual interest rate. And so I want my annual interest rate to only correspond with annual numbers. Well, this is the number of months of construction. I really want it to be the years of construction. How do I get the years of construction? Well, I take the number of months divided by 12. And since the cash flow tab looks at things monthly, and oftentimes, you know, when you're, especially for single family homes, it may take less than a year to build. So, you know, having something that's based on months here is good, even though it's an annual interest rate. So the way to solve that is to divide those number of months of construction by 12. That'll get you an annual period that you're under construction.
Thank you.
All right.
I don't know about you, but numbers make me sweat a little. That's why I appreciate this Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's all right.
Mhm.
Where do you get the construction loan amount? Well, that's a good question. In talking with banks primarily, you have to find out what sort of loan to cost they're willing to give you, or loan to value that they're willing to give you. So, you know, if you're working with a bank and you're working in, say, a more distressed area, they're going to be looking at more of the value. So let's say that the home value is $100,000. They may say that we'll lend you 80% of that. So they'll lend you 80,000. Well, if your construction costs are $200,000, then you have to come up with $120,000 of equity or OPM, other people's money, right? And so you've got to figure out how to make up that difference. Now, if I have seen situations where they'll fund, you know, 80% of cost, and you know the cost is $200,000, so they'll fund 180. Wait a minute. 160,000 of that. But where the value, in a neighborhood where the value of the home is going to be $300,000, and so that's a much better situation, of course, to be in. You don't have a gap. But typically, it's going to be something around 80% of either loan to value or loan to cost. But it's up to the bank. So let's take a look at some of the questions here. Yeah, and the cost and the value are both here on the development budget, right? It's costing us $198,000, almost $199,000 to build the 1,400 square foot homes. It's costing us $175,000 to build the 1,200 square foot homes. That's the cost. Our estimated value is $300,000 on the 1,400 square foot, 260 on the 1,200 square foot homes. So now we have to figure out with the bank which they're going to be willing to lend. More than likely on this one, it's always the lesser of the two, right? You have to always keep that in mind. Banks are naturally conservative. They're not going to overfund you. They're not going to give you a loan that's 80% of $300,000. That would be a loan of $240,000. Well, you'd be able to build the house and have the most wonderful worldwide trip ever with the extra $42,000 that you borrowed. So they're not going to do that. They'll limit then. If it's based on value, then they'll limit. They may fund 100% of your costs. That's pretty rare. Usually it's the lower of the two, 80% of value or 80% of cost.
And that just really depends on the conversation that you have and all the other factors that you're bringing to the table, correct?
That's right. That's right. And sometimes it's not even factors related to your community. It's national factors. So during the Great Recession, if you were trying to do, if you were trying to sell new homes, banks just did not want to talk with you. It didn't matter, if you were in the best community, the strongest financially strongest community in the nation, the banks just were not interested in real estate at all. They're getting burned so much in other places that just kind of as a sector, they said no, they didn't want to be in it. And that sometimes happens during recessions. So
the rest of these questions is the information now from this pro forma.
Now, all these questions, the information can be found on the pro forma. So let's go through them and I'll show you where to find it. So how much developer subsidy is needed using the profit and loss spreadsheet? So we can go to the blue tab, the profit and loss spreadsheet, and the amount of developer subsidy. Now this is a profitable project. So before we answer the question, let's just take a look at this. Our revenue, even after we pay that exorbitant 5% real estate fee, those realtors, I tell you, right, Angel?
I'm a realtor, everyone.
Yeah. So we're earning $2,128,000 in revenue. It's costing us $1,979,000 to build these things. So we actually do have a profit of $149,000. So you might say to yourself, oh, no developer subsidy is needed. The problem is that this does not include the developer fee, right? We didn't have a developer fee in terms of a dollar amount. We had chosen the 10% profit. And so, yes, the project is profitable, but it's not profitable enough. So we need the profit to be 224,000. The profit was actually 149,000. And so we need a developer subsidy, a relatively minor developer subsidy of $75,000 in order to have this project move forward. And so that's one way of looking at profit. There's another way of looking at profit, and that is based on the cash flow analysis. So after you've gone through this very complicated procedure, and right now we've only been given two sources of financing, right? We've been given that there's debt, and so presumably we've not been given any information on a city grant. So presumably then everything else is equity. And so let's take a look at our cash flow, the very last line. So the cash balance here, this line 71, is our running total of how we're doing. So in month one, we expend $130,000 to buy the land. So we're short. We have negative cash flow of 130,000. We start building sidewalks and clearance and demolition. We have to pay that $4,000 loan application fee. So our cash balance goes up even more. We keep on spending money, and our cash balance keeps on going higher and higher negative. Now, eventually, though, we start selling houses. And so, first of all, the rate of growth starts to go down. And then finally, as we sell more and more houses, we start turning the corner. So in month 8 of this, we start to turn the corner. And so that's the highest, month 8 is our highest month of expenditures. In month 9, we start to get some revenue. We've sold a house. And so we get to use that money to offset some of our expenditures. So our cash balance actually goes down. And that is going to start to continue. So it keeps on going down. Here, let me just move this so that it all stays kind of color coded. Okay. So our cash balance is slowly going down as we're selling these houses, as we've been doing house sales, right? And so finally, we sell that last house. So here we have the total revenue of $202,128,000. We have expenses of $1,997,000. And so we have the cash balance showing here of $130,000. Now, so that's another place that we can look to see kind of how much we've made here. So it's just another place that we can look to see if our project's profitable or not, right? If when the cash balance stabilizes, if it stabilizes at a number that's positive, that means that we've at least made a profit. It may not be sufficient profit, but we've at least made a profit. If it stays negative, then we've got a big problem, right? We've got a problem. We've got a project that simply, doesn't even come to break even. It continues to lose money. The expenses are higher than the revenue projected. Will the developer see his or her developer fee based on your cash flow analysis? No, because we want there to be, we were looking for a projected profit of $224,000. The actual profit is $130,000, so we need a subsidy. How much equity will be required based on your cash flow analysis? This is an interesting one. Question number 5. So I've created some boxes here. And so these 2 boxes tell you what's the largest size loan you need and what's the amount of equity that you need to bring to the table. So question 5 asks us specifically about the equity. So what we have to do is we have to look for the highest point in our cash flow analysis. So this is the equity invested. So we're initially at 65,000, it builds. And the point where it becomes the highest, which is 316,592, that's what we have to come up with in terms of equity. And one of the things that this pro forma is set up to do is that the bank is always paid first before equity. Once in a while, I'll see a project come across my desk where the developer has somehow worked out with their bank, and this is pretty rare, but where they get to keep some percentage of the profit from each sale. That's a very generous bank. That the bank does not have to do that. Oftentimes what the bank will say is, we get paid first, the bank gets paid first, you get paid basically with that last sale. So we're selling 8 houses here. Basically it's going to take probably 7 of the houses to be sold to get rid of our construction loan. And that last 1 or 2 houses is finally where we get some money. So we have to come up with $316,592. Now, eventually, as we sell the units, right, and here we go, we get part of the sale of unit number 7, and we get part of the sale of unit number 8, and that returns our equity investment to us. So one of the things I like about homeownership projects is that it's a way of recycling your capital fairly quickly, as opposed to rental housing where your capital is tied up in the rental unit, for as long as you own it. Now you're going to be generating income off of that investment, but you don't have that investment then to do other projects. Whereas with home ownership, your equity recycles fairly quickly. What is the amount of your construction loan? Question number 6. Again, it's the highest number in row 59. And so we start out, we're borrowing. Remember, the bank is covering 50% of the acquisition, which is why this month I increased my debt by $65,000, but I also increased my equity by $65,000. Then I take my previous month's debt. So this $65,000 goes over into month 2, but then I'm adding another $55,960 of debt, which is my other construction, my infrastructure, and some financing costs. So my construction draws slowly increase over time, but they're going to peak. And basically, they're going to peak once I'm able to start selling houses. And so you'll notice that all of the proceeds of the first house sale go to offset the debt. None of it, at least in this pro forma, none of it goes to repay equity first. The bank gets paid first. So I need a construction loan from the bank of approximately $548,000. And that will get me through all 8 houses. If they're not willing to give me that much, I'm going to have to scale my project back. If I can't come up with, $316,592, I'm going to have to scale my project back. Now, I just looked at a project with a colleague, and we found that actually the bank's willing to give more money than we anticipated. And we were actually able to add a few more homes because of it. So these two are a couple of important boxes that you want to watch. And then finally, what is my construction financing costs? How much construction interest am I going to have to? How much construction interest am I going to have to pay here? Well, that's captured here under construction interest, $18,248. I've actually never done this. Let's see how accurate our formula gets us. Oh, okay, on the cash flow tab, it's actually lowercase NDC, not capitalized.
Does it work out?
Yeah, let's see. Need to count the number of months I'm under construction.
Okay. Now, will we need to do this as well, or?
No, this is just
Okay.
just as a test. This is only a test.
Only a test.
Yeah. If this was a real emergency. All right, so I basically have 10 months of construction. Okay, so this underestimated construction interest a little bit. So the cash flow tab, which is, the cash flow tab is the kind of the gold standard here, because you're actually looking at things on a monthly basis. It came up with $18,248. The estimate came up with about $13,700. So by formula. So it's, in this case, it underestimated construction interest a little bit. So, but like I said, this is a more complicated project. We're trying to do 8 units here. This estimate is perfect for kind of a single unit because, in fact, it should get you pretty darn close if you're only dealing with a single unit or just a couple units that you're doing relatively close in time together. All right.
Now it's about 3:40, and I know all of this information is fantastic. We probably won't get to the second case study, but I just wanted to make sure people were asking questions so that they can continue on to the other ones as they once we finish.
Yeah, I think it would be great if, on your own to do assignment 2, which is where we're offered some land nearby, but we can only acquire that land if we sell the units to households making 80% of the area median income. And so the development costs are anticipated to be the same. However, prices must drop by about $40,000 for each unit. But the other additional item here is that the city has already prepared the lots for development, so we don't have the clearance and demolition expenses, and they'll waive permit fees because we're doing a project on land bank authority land. So the question here is, do we need the entire cost of the land eliminated, or can you throw the guy a bone and pay a reduced price for the land? And then assignment 3 is more of an qualitative question rather than a quantitative question. If we could do the project on the land that we first identified in assignment 1, so we're going to absorb the $130,000 of land acquisition cost, and we're going to absorb the clearance and demolition expenses. But we can, sell them for the higher prices, $300,000 on the larger units, $260,000 on the smaller units. And the city came up with down payment assistance to help our buyers bring down the cost of the unit. Which approach would you recommend and why? So typically, what I like to see communities do is utilize down payment assistance rather than forcing units to be sold at a lower price. Because when you force units to be sold at a lower price, particularly when you force them to be sold for below what they actually cost to build, you're starting to skew the market. And what's going to happen is that appraisers are going to pick up those sale prices and they're going to use them for future valuations of that neighborhood. So in my opinion, it's always better to try to sell the property for what it actually costs, right? If it costs me $300,000 to build the thing, and I also get another $30,000 in profit because I'm doing a 10% developer fee, my cost in was $330,000. I want on the sales record for that house to show that it's sold for at least $330,000, if not more. And that way, it helps strengthen the entire neighborhood. Now, I know from an affordable housing standpoint, some people may say, well, that makes the neighborhood overall less affordable. In the short term, it may, but overall, construction costs are a global phenomenon. And if you ever want to actually be able to build in a neighborhood and have some, maybe some eventually expectation of not needing heavy subsidies, those sales, you can't have those suppressed sales in the mix of your home sales. Your appraisals will never get high enough to be able to make deals work. And so in some ways, you're kind of, you're aiding a few families and you're condemning a whole neighborhood by forcing sale prices to be lower than what the actual reality is. It's a much better public policy strategy, in my opinion, to use down payment assistance. The Smiths want to buy this house that costs $300,000. They really can only afford $240,000, and therefore we're going to give them down payment assistance of $60,000 to make up that difference. But on the sale records, everything says $300,000. And when the appraisals come and look at that neighborhood, they see a house that was sold for $300,000, which makes that next project that much easier. So that's kind of what so assignment 2 and assignment 3 kind of mathematically show those 2 points, and then assignment 3 is more of that thought process. But please take a look at each of the case studies, and I'll send in answer keys for each of them so you can compare your answers.
That would be awesome. I mean, I think we could probably do a whole complete deep dive on the pros and cons of pricing at cost.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It,
Yeah.
and it's really difficult when you have city policies.
Mhm.
I was just talking with City of Cincinnati. Their down payment assistance program right now is set to be $14,000. Even though what they're noticing is that, even entry-level homes right now in Cincinnati are, in the mid 200,000 range. And so no one's using their down payment assistance. And they're, like, why is no one using our down payment assistance? Because it just covers a little bit of the gap, it doesn't go far enough, so we're going to start a process to, start looking at what's the real cost of housing versus, what people can actually afford, and design a program that actually meets that gap, rather than arbitrarily setting a number, which particularly in today's market, simply makes no sense. And they had actually recently raised it from 5,000 to 14,000, and they thought that was going to increase the usage. The market was going in a different direction, and we really need our public policies to reflect, what's happening, both in your local market, but frankly also in the national market, the regional market, and the international market. Construction materials are an international market. Construction labor is typically a regional market. And then sale price and value is a very local market. So all three of those marketplaces impact what we're trying to do here.
Can you say that one more time? You said materials are international.
Mm-hmm. Labor is typically regional.
Labor is regional, and then the value is local.
The value is local.
Mhm. Thank you. Now, I know you said you wanted to go over the Pewtown housing. Is
Let's
that
just take a
one?
look at it. It's a
Okay,
very kind of similar case.
okay.
So let's see.
So essentially everything that we've done in that first case study, we should be able to apply and get correct answers for Pewtown.
Exactly. So here we're building 50 3-bedroom homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes. So basically, Pewtown is Dogwood kind of on steroids, right? Dogwood was 8 units. Pewtown is 50 units. And so, we're going to now Pewtown is an older case. All of our cases are based on actual case studies that we've done someplace in America. So you can tell this is kind of an older case because the estimated cost of construction is $52 per square foot, for a new construction home. So this is kind of an older one, but the numbers still correspond, right? So you also notice a corresponding very low sale price as well on these. And so and the point's not the specifics of the case. The point is, you putting the numbers into the spreadsheet and making this tool work for you, making this tool do the math and provide you the answers that you need to determine whether this is a case that or a project that can go forward or not. One of the things that's a little different about Pewtown is that in Dogwood, we did not have a contingency. Oops. And so there's often a question of what do you do with the contingency? There's a couple ways that I like to pro forma contingency. Either you can kind of divide it up between your homes, and just add it to each home. Or in this case, this backloads the contingency. So it assumes that the contingency sum will be spent in month 14, which is basically the end of construction. So that's where you would place contingency. And that really, to me, makes a lot of sense because money's fungible, right? Money, I can move money around. And so if my costs are exceeding my budget at the beginning, I'm just going to be pulling down more of my resources a little earlier. I'm not going to have to dig into my contingency until the very end, where now I've exhausted all my regular budget, but I still have homes to build. And so that's when I'm going to have to start drawing down that contingency. So in most homeownership projects, you don't typically hit that contingency until the very end. Whereas sometimes in multifamily projects, you may end up dipping into contingency early. The other thing that's interesting about Pewtown is landscaping. So landscaping, typically, when do you put in the landscaping? After basically most of your construction has been done. So in this case, you're going to put the landscaping basically in the month that you sell it. So it's going to take you, I think it's 4 months to build, and then you're going to sell it in 2 months. So where I put landscaping was basically it took me 4 months to build the house. And then in month 5 is when I put my landscaping in. So, things like that are just important. A lot of these things you can kind of logic through in terms of where where am I going to spend my cost of land? Well, it's probably going to be month one. Water and sewer, that's probably going to be early in the process. Engineering, architecture and engineering is probably going to be a front-loaded expense rather than a back-loaded expense. So, as you're actually taking on real projects in your careers, you're not going to be given this type of estimate initially. You're going to have to create this. So you're going to have to figure out where you're going to place all of this. The nice thing also is that if you're off by a month or two, in terms of construction interest, it's not going to make that big of a deal. So it's only if you're really far off that you start to incur more construction interest than you normally would.
Well, Corey, it's about 3:57 and I have a huge question, which we
Sure.
probably won't get to. Again, if anybody has any questions or would like to view this again, we will be sending this recording out to everyone, and we will also post it on our YouTube channel. So look out for that email, and it will include a feedback form and evaluation to make sure that we are standing on point of what we need and to make sure you're getting the most out of these deep dives, because it's for you. And so with your feedback, we can continue to bring new topics to the surface and to ensure that you are understanding what we're putting out there. Now, Corey, my question to you is, with the current market trends or if you're expecting a house to sell within 2 months, but it doesn't, where does that go into our pro forma?
Right. So what that's going to do is that's going to mean that you incur more construction interest. So if you have unspent contingency, that's how you're going to pay for that extra construction. If you don't, then it depends on how you're counting your developer fee. Either you're going to be pulling it out of your developer fee if you put in a dollar amount of developer fee, or it's going to be taken out of your profit for the project. So yeah, that's what will happen if you don't sell it in the projected time frame. And it's also, most of these cases are, construction is in 3-month, sales is 30 days later, within 30 days. Again, these are teaching tools. And so these have all been simplified, to make it, in part, to make it fit reasonably on the cash flow tab. We don't want you to have 200 columns, out there from a teaching standpoint, but try to be as conservative as you can be, right? So if your contractor is saying, gosh, with materials, normally this would cost, or this would take 6 months to build, but if we get delayed with materials, it might add a couple months, right, onto this months to construct, right? So if you're not sure, if you're not fully confident that you can sell these things in 30 days, talk with your real estate agent. That's why you're hiring them, is their expertise. Try to get a good sense of how long things are staying in the market. And of course, be promoting your project, from the minute you secure that land and you've, got your development plan. You as the developer need to be selling just as hard as your real estate agent. This is your project. This is your profit. And so you have to be actively involved.
I completely agree. Well, Corey, it is about that time. Thank you so much. I took lots of notes, everyone. I learned right along with you. And I'm looking forward to doing the rest of these case studies to see if I'm really on point. So again, thank you everyone for being here. Corey, fantastic job. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. You're such a great resource and we appreciate that. And again, we will be putting this video out and we look forward to seeing many of you in future deep dives. Corey, do you have any last words?
Take on your first project.
Yeah.
You know, the best way to learn it is by doing it.
Agreed. And that's the best way. So thank you and have a fantastic day.